Hi there, I'm going to have a little bit of a primitive pottery and sealing experimental session. We're going to be using this fire pit and this stove. So it's pretty much the anniversary today of a course I did in 2020 with a guy called Paul Smith, and what I'll do, I'll put a link in the notes below for the primitive pottery stuff that he does. So I tried firing his stuff when I got back, and I've had various other experiments, and this today is the biggest one I've done to date. There's plenty of videos out on YouTube, but I would also suggest looking at Andy Ward's page as well. He's a guy in Arizona who does primitive pottery, and it's great. What I've done here in this fire bowl, I put earth down to imitate firing it out in the wild, instead of having it on metal. So whilst I get the embers going in this to give the pots a little bit of a warm up, I'll take you back to the beginning when I processed the clay in the first place. So if you follow the link that's just appeared, that'll tell you how to process the clay and get the sediment and stuff out of it if you don't already know. Now most of it's a sort of brown grey colour, but I've got another one that I'm just keeping for a separate reason. This is the kind of stuff you're trying to sieve out. So this is the general colour of the stuff I'm processing, but I'm keeping some of this to process separately. It's more of a sort of yellowy, sort of burnt orange colour, and that's going to make slip, but more on that later. So I've finished processing all the clay. We'll have a little look at it in detail. First of all, this is the good clay that I've processed from the riverbank. It's quite smooth, and I'm looking forward to that making some good pots, in all honesty. This is similar, but it's a little more gritty. It's from one of the first flushes that I did of the clay, but I thought it's worth keeping, and the grit in there might act as a little bit of temper, which is what I'm going to put in all of these pots actually. This is dry clay from Brownsea Island. There was a dream of a couple who wanted to find pottery on the island, and it turned out the clay wasn't quite good enough quality. Now I'm not going to flush this at all because it's really smooth, but again, we'll see how this one goes. This here is modelling clay. I can't remember what the additive is, but it's air drying. So once I make something out of this, it'll be dry before the pottery firing session, but it's still going to be worth doing, even if it's just for experimentation on with slips and what have you. The thing I'm going to use as temper is this builder's sand that I've sieved, and apparently what temper does, it helps to, in the firing, stop cracks and the like by helping the gases to release from the actual clay. Well, so I understand anyway. So I'm going to go for probably about 20% by volume. And finally, just introducing this little bowl that I've got. What I'm going to do is line this with cling film and use this as a model to make the bowls. So hopefully they'll all be the same size and roughly the same thickness, so I know that they're all going to be fired in the same way. Here's the first pot using the finer river clay done. What I did, I weighed a certain amount out and then made what I had left, and there's about 300 grams used in this with a little bit of added water and some extra sand. So now I know how much clay to put in for each of the other pots to keep them consistent. So I'm just doing a bit of burnishing. I'm using a flat stone, but I guess you could also use something like a piece of antler as well. This inside of this one isn't done, but apparently when it feels like leather, you're supposed to do it. And I've done the outside here, and you can see it's made it really rather smooth and shiny. But obviously it's showing up where the cling film's been when I moulded the pot. What it's supposed to do is, amongst other things, make the pot a little less porous once it's been fired. So I mentioned slip earlier, and basically what it is, it's a mainly clay-based, almost liquidy solution, sort of a thickness of cream that you put paint onto the outside of pots, and indeed the inside as well. So I'm going to do mustard-coloured clay with fine sand in it. The Brownsea clay, this one with fine sand and a little ground slate, and another Brownsea clay with a little fine sand and some ground wood ash in it. I'm going to paint it on with this craft brush. So let's look at the runners and riders who are going to play Survive the Flames. Contestant number 1. This is the regular clay with fine sand added as temper and a light coloured clay slip added around the edge. Contestant number 2. This was made from some of the stuff left over from refining the clay and is a lot rougher. It's basically the run to the litter, and I'll be surprised and delighted if it survives. You can also see where I've had to rebuild the side on the left. Contestant number 3. This is made with air dried clay and fine sand as temper as an experiment. The band around the outside of the pot, that's Brownsea clay slip, and the 2 bands inside are Brownsea slip with fine sand and slate, and the nice clay as a slip too. Contestant 4 and 4A. This is air dried clay that was left over, and one pot's been formed in the regular shape and one is a smaller little hand formed pot. These are not going to be fired and have no temper in them. These are for experiments with sealing them if the others blow up. Contestant number 5, again a little bit of spare clay, and this was made into an oil lamp. It has 2 of the slips on. One is the regular nice looking clay slip on the top, and the other one is the basic Brownsea slip on the bottom. Contestant number 6, this is some of the regular clay that was left over, so I've formed another bowl with a nice clay slip around the edge, and the inside is the combination of the 2 Brownsea slips. Contestant 7, miscellaneous. We have here a brooch that is going to be a pewter experiment. We have an outdoor traditionalist badge, and we also have some beads made out of some spare Brownsea clay. The slip on there is the nice clay one that was just being used up. This pre-fired and pre-glazed individual will be by my side the whole time of doing the firing. My cups of tea. So welcome back to the present. I've got the 4 bowls balanced on a solid stone, just warming in the fire. This is to get rid of the thermal shock. You don't want all the water that might still be in there, even though I have been drying these for a week, to suddenly cause you grief later on. So what I'll do, I'll keep slowly turning them, and fingers crossed. And for the fire stove, what I've done is lit the fire at the front and got the pieces at the back. The early casualty is the outdoor traditionalist badge, which was quite thin, and as I put it in, it caught a twig and smashed into pieces. Bit more of a hit and hope with the fire stove, obviously, because I can't reach the back and do much with them, but what I'm going to do is build the fire up now and see what happens. So I've sorted the hit and hope out on the fire stove. I've been turning these, obviously, and they're nice and hot, and I think I've turned them enough now, and I think now is the time to build the fire and give them a go. So the firebox is burning well, or going alarmingly, we'll have to see. I'm going to try and set the firewood around the pottery loosely, and that's also the reason I've got the stone for aeration, because this is some of the stuff I've fired before, and apparently this black stuff here is just oxidation where the carbon hasn't burned off, so I'm going to try and mitigate that, although I'll be happy with another dark pot or 2 and the meat being intact, of course. Well, that's a good start, isn't it? The one bottom left has had 2 little pops and half the sides come off. It's a shame, that was the Brownsea clay. I wanted that to come out all right. I find there's a slight problem with the fire pit, and I can't get the fire low enough over the pottery. And in that time as well, the air-dried one has also just disgraced itself a little bit as well. I've finally got it going properly in this pesky wind, but I've got to be on it because that's looking a little bit precariously stacked, to say the least. It's kind of collapsed, but onto itself, luckily, so I'll just have to let this burn out and sort of see what the score is on the other side. I'm just looking in here. I'm going to try and lift the wood up with another piece of wood, because the 2 pots I think are still intact are actually still quite dark, so obviously the oxidisation is not going so well on that, but we'll see. So that's the pendant brooch medallion thingy there, and that's the oil lamp there. They're still a bit carbon covered. I don't know what to make them really. I might just chuck them in the other fire that's still going just to finish them off. So I've put the bits in from the stove. It's not really making any difference to the carbonisation there, and it's all dying down on the pots now, so I'll take you for a quicker look at them. And notice I've got the goggles on because the Brownsea one really was clicking and popping away. So here we go, that one there, that's the remains of the Brownsea one, which was all over the place. This one here is the runty one. That is the regular one, which I think has got a few cracks down the side, and we've got something of a bowl there with the air-dried one. Whether I'm going to get to experiment with sealing any of these is another matter. I'm just on the cool down at the moment. But the 3 things I was going to try was this. This is cherry sap. Some say you can consume it, some say you can't, so do your own research on that. The other one was some tallow I've made, and the other one was some beeswax. I've got the embers still cooling down. They are very hot still. I've just cut the top off a little tonic can, and I've put the cherry sap in to see how it does actually melt while we're waiting. Well, it's been in the fire for about 10 minutes now, and I can hold my hand over for 4 seconds, so it's pretty hot, and it just smells of burnt sugar. I wonder if there is too much sugar in it, and I was thinking it might be like pine sap, but obviously it's not quite the same. So, you know, even though it doesn't work, that's another experiment angle that I don't need to pursue. And after all that shenanigans, let's have a look at the runners and riders now. They've played Survive the Flames. Or not. Contestant number 1 survived some of the firing process and then decided to break apart. Contestant number 2, the runt of the litter, proved to be the case. Contestant number 3, the Brownsea clay, It has survived as a whole pot, but large parts of the outside have actually broken off. Contestant 4 and 4A, these are the insurance policies which proved quite prophetic. The one on the left has been lined with tallow and the one on the right with beeswax. Contestant number 5, this was the extra one I did with the river clay, and it has a small crack down the side, but it seems to be the best of the pots. I've lined it with beeswax. Contestant 6, it had the slip on, but of course it hasn't oxidised properly and is rather black, but is still in one piece. Contestant number 7, miscellaneous. As I mentioned, the Outdoor Traditions badge, which I made at the last minute, broke from my heavy handling, but the other bits seem to have survived. So in conclusion, it's a little bit disappointing. I'd hoped like 2 pots would have come out viable, but you know, it is what it is. It's an experimental day. I think going forward, I'd make sure it's definitely not a windy day, because it's been so problematic. More temper, because I don't think I put 20% in thinking about it. I think it was probably less than that by some way. Maybe just less pots in there means I can build the fire a bit lower. It's always another opportunity, isn't it? This is the one pot that sort of survived the firing the best. The one with the crack down the side that I've lined with beeswax. I filled it with water in the sink within a bowl, and I'll give it an hour just to see if any leaks out or not. So a few days later, having picked through the remains of the pots, with the one that I've got in the sink with the beeswax in, standing with water to see how it holds, I've got 3 things here. I've got the 2 insurance policy pots, and I've got the little oil burner just there. So what I'm going to do, I've got egg, some pots of water and some pigment. I'm going to put some tempera paint on. That one's got wood ash in, that's red oxide, that's yellow oxide. I'll be using an old craft brush and some earbuds to apply it. I'm back after an hour, and I'm pleased to say, even with a fairly noticeable crack in the actual bowl, that's not lost a drop out there. So that beeswax is a good sealant. I mean, obviously it wouldn't be fireproof, but even so, it means that the pot's got everyday usage. And here we are, all painted up. The only thing that hasn't been done is the middle item, which is going to have the pewter inlay done, and that'll be another video.